By 1917, the Lewis gun was everywhere. British infantry carried it through the mud at Passchendaele. Belgian soldiers trusted it in trenches they had defended for 3 years. Russian units used it on a front most Americans could not place on a map. 8 allied nations depended on it. The United States Army did not have it. What the American Army had when it sent men to France was 1,100 outdated machine guns and a French weapon so prone to jamming that a Marine later wrote the only solution to a stoppage was throwing it away. The Army's procurement record explained in careful language why an American colonel's design had been found unsuitable. That colonel had built the gun. One man turned it down. What followed cost more than the procurement record was ever willing to say. His name was Isaac Newton Lewis, not a civilian inventor with a diagram and a petition. A United States Army colonel who had graduated from West Point in 1884 and spent 3 decades inside the institution that was about to turn him away. In 1911, working from the initial designs of a gunmaker named Samuel McLean, Lewis produced something the Army had never seriously possessed: a light, air-cooled machine gun that one man could carry and operate alone. 26 pounds, 750 rounds per minute, no crew of 6 required. On the surface, it was a technical argument. Underneath it was something older, one officer telling his institution that its standard for acceptable firepower had fallen behind the war that was coming. The man who controlled that standard was General William Crozier, Chief of Ordnance, since 1901. In June of 1912, Lewis tried to force the question. Captain Charles Chandler fired the gun from a Wright biplane at an airfield in College Park, Maryland, the first machine gun ever fired from an aircraft. It was genuine. It was also unauthorized. The Army's position was that airplanes existed for reconnaissance, not weapons. The Board of Ordnance gave the demonstration a cool reception. The table had not moved. On the surface, the rejection was procedural. The record shows what the record was permitted to show. In 1913, Lewis resigned his commission. According to later accounts, he was not quiet about it. He had been, in his own words, slapped by rejections from ignorant hacks. He packed 4 prototype models into cases, boarded a ship, and carried his invention to Europe. He opened Arms Automatique Lewis in Belgium. Then Birmingham took up production. He left in 1913. The war started in 1914. By the time British units were moving through the mud that European armies had spent 2 years trying to solve, the Lewis gun was the answer they reached for. Light enough for one man, reliable in the conditions that Crozier had cited as problematic. By the end of 1917, every British infantry battalion had one. The Birmingham Small Arms Factory produced 145,000 of them during the war. The gun did exactly what Lewis had said it would do. Crozier had not invented his reasons. The 1913 prototype had genuine problems. The field test requirements had not been satisfied. His written justification in 1916 held together on paper, but the personal history underneath it did not disappear. Lewis had been jealous of Crozier's appointment. Crozier had considered Lewis unethical for privately patenting Army-adjacent inventions and had blocked his fire control devices from standard designation years before the machine gun dispute began. These 2 men had been settling a personal argument through institutional channels long before the war made the cost visible. They had served together for years inside the same department. Lewis had earned his first patent in 1888 for an artillery rangefinder the United States Army had also turned down. The pattern of rejection was already established long before the machine gun became the final and costliest test. When America declared war in April 1917, the Army's machine gun inventory was roughly 1,100 weapons, most of them obsolete. The Army, about to mobilize nearly 5 million men, did not have a working light automatic weapon for its infantry. Officers in Washington, who had signed off on years of procurement rejections, were now writing requisitions to the French and British governments, asking to borrow what they had not built. The French Chauchat was what the army reached for. Designed cheaply, built quickly, and already known to French units as a weapon that could not always be trusted in mud, its crescent magazine was partially open on one side, letting in the trench filth it was carried through. American quality control tests rejected 40% of the units that arrived. In August 1917, the Army ordered 24,000 more, rechambered from French 8mm to American .30 caliber. Rechambering made the problems worse. 9 divisions shipped to France with them anyway. Lawrence Stallings was a Marine who lost part of his leg at Belleau Wood. After the war, he wrote about the Chauchat with the precision of someone who had relied on one when it mattered. When it jammed, he wrote, the stoppage was generally remedied by throwing the gun away. He was not trying to be funny. The hardiest part of the story is not the Chauchat. The Navy had purchased 6,000 Lewis guns in September of 1917 for the Marine Corps. The Marines trained with them extensively. They crossed the Atlantic with them. When they arrived in France and were attached to the 2nd Infantry Division, the Lewis guns were taken from them. The Marines were issued Chauchats instead. No documented order explaining the exchange has surfaced in a form that plainly accounts for the decision. It was just the decision. A Marine stood on those docks and watched the better weapon be carried away with nothing official to argue against. On December 31, 1917, General William Crozier appeared before the Senate Committee on Military Affairs. His statement from that day is a publicly archived document. Formal, careful, built in the language that institutions produce when they are asked to account for themselves without quite admitting fault. By December of 1917, Crozier reported, the Ordnance Department had placed contracts worth $1.5 billion for arms and ammunition. He addressed the shortages. He addressed the reliance on Allied weapons. He justified each decision as the best available judgment at the moment it was made. The index of that document includes the name Lewis gun. Crozier had spent years on record explaining why the gun was unsuitable. He was now in a room where senators were measuring the cost of that judgment against the casualty reports from France. By that December, every British battalion had a Lewis gun. American soldiers in those same trenches were carrying Chauchats. He defended the decisions. The record of what those decisions had cost was being assembled by other men in other rooms. He was removed from active leadership of the Ordnance Department in 1918 and reassigned to an area command that did not involve weapons procurement. He retired in January of 1919. He lived until 1942. John Moses Browning had demonstrated his water-cooled machine gun at Springfield Armory in May of 1917. In the first test, it fired 20,000 rounds with almost no malfunctions, then 21,000 more continuously for 48 minutes. The Ordnance Board was impressed and still unconvinced that production models would match the prototype. By the time Browning's weapons were reaching the front in numbers, the war was nearly over. American engineering had produced the right answers. American procurement had taken too long to put them in the right hands. Lewis lived until 1931, in retirement in New Jersey. The gun bearing his name had served 8 Allied nations. The United States Army had ultimately acquired 34,000 Lewis guns, almost all of them configured for aircraft. The men in the trenches never received them in the numbers that would have mattered. He had been right about the gun. He had also been difficult, jealous of a rival's position, and willing to patent work the institution considered its own. Both things were true. The soldiers between those two truths had no opinion about which one was more important. The Ordnance Department restructured after the war. The Browning automatic rifle became the American light automatic standard and served for decades. The institutional lesson, what happens when a general's personal rivalry with a peer shapes a procurement decision that sends men to war under-equipped, was absorbed quietly, filed somewhere, not adjudicated in public. Somewhere in America today, 2 men are arguing over a Lewis gun. One says it was the finest light machine gun of the First World War. The other says the Army made a documented, defensible call based on a defective prototype. Neither of them knows the names Lewis or Crozier. They are arguing about the same thing those two men argued about in 1912, whether the man with the invention or the man with the authority gets to decide what is ready and who pays when that answer is wrong.